Hello, this podcast was recorded on the 2nd of March at 10 a.m. Jakarta time. Things may have changed by the time you hear this. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to Reformasi Dispatch. I'm Jeff Hutton, regional correspondent in Straits Times Singapore.
And I'm Kevin O'Rourke, producer of the Reformasi Weekly Service analyzing Indonesian politics and policymaking, coming to you via video.
Today on the program, Indonesia's tepid reaction to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the talk of delaying the 2024 presidential election, and is PLN going green? And after the break, we speak with Yu Liuqing of the Economist Intelligence Unit about the EIU's most recent democracy index that showed, and surprisingly enough, Indonesia climbed up the table. We brought him on the program to explain himself for this rare bit of good news, and he promised not to let it happen again. First, hey, how are you today, Kevin?
Busy, yeah. There's plenty to talk about these days, that's for sure. So at least things aren't dull, anyway.
Yeah. We've got democracy up against autocracy, I suppose. So let's talk about Indonesia. To me, it seems kind of surprising that they would be so lukewarm about I guess the right word is tepid. They would take such a light touch on Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah, I think this is characteristic of Indonesia, but it nonetheless, as you say, stands out. Maybe being president of the G20 has something to do with it, because Indonesia is still technically expecting to host Vladimir Putin in late October in Bali for the G20 summit. So that might make things a bit awkward.
Right. So it's got to be a little bit more than that, though, isn't it? I mean,
right. Well, yeah. Indonesia made a response to Russia's initial invasion, in which the foreign ministry and also the president repeatedly denounced war and called for peace. But they did so without ever saying the word Russia, and they urged restraint on all sides, as if there's more than one side.
Yeah.
That was weak. And then also the spokesperson for the foreign ministry made clear that Indonesia will not be taking part in supporting any economic sanctions against Russia. And in fact, went so far as to say that time and again, we have seen that sanctions are ineffective, or something to that effect. And I think that reflects sort of long, deep-seated, lingering animosities about the sanctions that Indonesia suffered about 20 years ago, when they were very limited. It was merely the U.S. which restricted Indonesia's access to military equipment due to human rights abuses in East Timor. So, but nonetheless, that's really shaped Indonesia's thinking. Plus, there's in the background always the sensitivities about Papua and the conditions of people in Papua, and disputes there about Indonesia's handling of Papua, which dates all the way back to the UN handled referendum back in the 1960s. So,
right, and it probably dovetails quite nicely with Indonesia's vow to remain non-aligned, along with the other non-aligned countries. It's sort of consistent with what India is doing too, I suppose. I mean, the needs are different, but the outcome is sort of the same. But I thought there was a really interesting op-ed in my paper, actually. It was carried in the Jakarta Post. Taufikur Rahman, I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He actually makes a link between the invasion and our next topic, the extending the presidential term that came out over the weekend, democracies don't tend to go to war. They tend to be more stable. And if you start playing with presidential term limits and canceling elections, or at least postponing them, you invite all sorts of instability that we've seen grow in Russia.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. Yeah, it's really remarkable, sort of the complementarity right now with people in Kyiv literally dying defending their democratic independence, and in Jakarta there's several political party elites who are willing to dispense with democracy in effect, and so it's quite a striking contrast there.
Yeah, so walk us through that. Who's I can't imagine a less popular idea.
Yeah, it's a real miscalculation on the part of these three party chairs. First, it was Muhammad Iskandar of the National Awakening Party, PKB, which is the political affiliate of Nahdlatul Ulama, the largest Islamic organization in Indonesia, the moderate one. Then he received support from the chair of the second largest party, Golkar, that's Erlangga Hartarto, who's also the coordinating economics minister, and is head of one of the two tracks of the G20 process, and also overseeing the COVID response, among other things. And then later in the week, surprisingly, the National Mandate Party chair, Zulkifli Hasan, a former forestry minister, came out also and supported the idea of postponing elections in 2024 for 1 or 2 years, is what they're talking about. So fortunately, pretty much all other parties and a host of political luminaries and influencers have denounced the idea, and therefore it seems unlikely to gain traction. But nonetheless, it's unsettling. It's caused a lot of concern, understandably. And it shows
what precipitated this? Why are we even have? Why the need to postpone elections for 1 or 2 years? And what would be gained?
I think that when you look at the motivations of these individuals, Iskandar, Hartarto, and Hasan, all three of them probably feel that they're in a politically precarious position personally right now. They all either depend on Widodo for political support, or they hope to ingratiate themselves with Widodo in the case of Hasan. And they all share the prospect of being in political Siberia after 2024, after Widodo leaves the scene. And so they just want to extend the current status quo and perpetuate it as long as they can.
Just out of curiosity, though, what ostensibly was the reason that they said, like, well, it just seems to come out of thin air?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, they've been producing falsehoods right and left. So one is that 73% of the public approves of the job performance of President Widodo, and therefore we have to postpone elections. It's quite a leap in logic, and it clearly defies the actual finding of numerous credible opinion polls that show that yes, 70 or 73% do approve of Widodo right now, but only 24% of the public wants to postpone elections. Postponing elections or removing term limits or any of these ideas to perpetuate the Widodo era are overwhelmingly unpopular, even among those who really ardently support Widodo. And that's because the public appreciates democracy, unlike the elites. The other argument is that the economy is doing well, and therefore investors don't want elections because elections are bad for the economy, which is also a falsehood because, as we know, the absence of elections is what's bad for the economy over the long term, especially when you have leaders such as Vladimir Putin. Yeah.
Elections, pesky things, waste of time, really. This guy's good. Let's keep him. Let's keep him 1 or 2 years, maybe 3. even more. I can imagine it went over like a lead balloon. It's just really unsettling that you can have a major party, though, before it, that it's still a topic worthy of consideration. The guys, and they're mostly men, some women, anti-democratic forces are not too far away from the center.
Yeah, it really shows that
too far away.
That's right. Yeah, it really shows that the political elite really has some very treacherous elements and figures who basically came of age during the Suharto era, and just despite their role as political leaders, really have no respect for basic fundamental principles of democracy, or even an understanding of the linkages with economics, or if they do, they're willing to dispense with all those considerations in exchange for their own personal political profit. So it's really very crass. So what they need to do is the reason why it's unsettling and it's a concern is that their plan would require an amendment to the Constitution, which requires a 2/3 quorum of the NPR. And the NPR is Parliament plus the smaller DPD, the Regional Representatives Assembly. So these three parties themselves, even if they were to get the DPD, still well short of what's needed to initiate an amendment process. But with a few more parties switching over, for example, Prabowo's Gerindra, Megawati's PDIP, then who knows what would happen. But fortunately, it seems as if these other parties are resolutely against the notion. One of the considerations is that these parties are going to have to contest a legislative election at some point, whether it's on schedule in 2024 or in the event of this postponement idea in 2025 or 2026. And at that point, it'd be kind of difficult for these parties to ask voters to vote for them after they had disenfranchised voters. So,
yeah, lots of Indira Gandhi. There's discussion of economic impact from the sanctions, and I can imagine that they would be energy related. What are you thinking about?
Yeah, there's a lot of attention right now to the economic consequences globally of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and there's destabilization and instability right now, which is not good for business. I think there's three kind of phases or components. There's a conventional war, but there's also international financial conflict in the form of sanctions, both for trade, but also for finance. And then a third element potentially is cyber attacks. So there's a lot of unpredictability right now, a lot of destabilization in different forms. Direct impacts or linkages for Indonesia are pretty minimal. Indonesia does not do a lot of export-import business with either Russia or Ukraine. The exception being that Indonesia does source a lot of its wheat imports, which is an important import item for Indonesia, from Ukraine. Actually, 23% of Indonesia's imported wheat is from Ukraine. And Ukraine, at this rate, may have no crop next year. So wheat prices are going to go up, and Indonesia is going to have to find wheat for its noodles. That primarily goes into their noodle manufacture for mostly the domestic market, but they also export some of those. They re-export the noodles. So there's going to be inflation impacts on food prices for consumers. And then, of course, there's a linkage indirectly on Indonesia via energy prices. And that's a double-edged sword. So it's always the case. Indonesia exports a lot of commodities. So when commodity prices are high, export revenues are high, government revenues go up a little bit. But Indonesia also has a giant consumer economy. So consumers either bear the brunt of higher energy costs, an electricity bill, or their petrol. Or the finance ministry comes in and subsidizes those things and takes the hit. So that dynamic is going to play out. And then I think, but the other major thing though is how all of this affects China. The war, the financial sanctions, and maybe even the cybersecurity. Because China is very much in the middle. You've got the U.S. and Europe on one side with Japan, against Russia on the other side, and China is squarely in the middle, and China may need to choose sides one way or the other. And then those choices are going to have various consequences for the Chinese economy, which in turn are going to have consequences for the Indonesian economy because China is so important to Indonesia. So, in short, it's unclear. Yeah.
Right. China doesn't like a loser. They like to pick the winning side, and the war, at least for now, this first week, isn't going as probably planned by Putin. I think he kind of thought that they would be welcomed with open arms. They're not. It's a little harder than he thought. And if it does go south, I kind of wonder what that does. The estimation among the Chinese toward Putin and the cover that he was expecting from them, as he also suffers U.S. sanctions. I think it must have been. I mean, I know nothing about Russia or China, but I'm sort of thinking that the calculus shifts with respect to this war, and if it doesn't go well, if it is messy, and wars are messy, we're not talking about Indonesia here at all now. He's getting the exact opposite of everything that he probably wanted. I don't know anything about Vladimir Putin either, but I can't imagine a worse outcome. It's just the stupidity of all this.
Yeah.
Having trouble wrapping my head.
Yeah, it's really stupid and tragic. That's for sure. Yeah, I agree. China doesn't like to choose a loser, but we're in a post-truth era, so even the losers can portray themselves as winners. Witness Donald Trump. Yeah. So sure. I can envision Putin leveling Ukraine tragically, as Russia did in Chechnya, and conducting an occupation somewhat analogous to President Bush's occupation in Iraq for a prolonged period of time, with all sorts of costs and adverse consequences, and yet never acknowledging defeat per se. And therefore, China could very well continue to side with Russia because there is so much commonality there in the defiance that they like to show vis-a-vis any attempts to pressure them into certain behaviors. And also China's continuing ambitions to maintain control of the South China Sea and, more importantly, take over Taiwan.
Yeah. And it's still early days. I mean, the Russians will invariably learn from their mistakes, and it is a massive, massive military. But I can't imagine the Ukrainians making it easy for them. At least one thing is we know, but it now seems clear, is that they're not going to go quietly.
Yeah.
There are some direct impacts on Indonesia with respect to sanctions, and it's the Tuban oil refinery, the one that's slowly coming coming any day now. It was, I think, that deal, 13.5 billion was in 2016. It's meant to come online in 2028. It's already been delayed, I think, 7 years. But more importantly, that refinery was going to rely on Russian oil, Russian crude, and not that deal also included up to a 20% stake in 2 oil fields in Siberia. Wrote a piece on this in the paper. So it's hard to. I mean, it was a crude oil play. Hard to stick by that if you're dealing with sanctions. And I know that the refinery isn't meant to come online until 2028, but that's only 6 years away. And the sanctions, the Crimea sanctions, have been enforced since 2014. So you got, $13.5 billion oil refinery. You want to know where the fucking crude's coming from.
Yeah. The problem with refineries is you can't make any money refining oil in Indonesia because the retail price of petrol is sold at below market prices, and it depends on subsidies from the government, and so therefore your multi-billion-dollar refinery investment is contingent on the whims of future political policymakers, whether they want to continue subsidizing you or not. And it just makes for a very risky investment profile. So Rosneft has had better options of places to put its capital. So I've never expected this project to go forward anyway, and it has been delayed already for years. So it's like if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, did it really fall? Or if a project stops, but it was never going to go anyway, has it really stopped? So,
right. It was maybe a little bit more window dressing, more style than substance.
Well, yeah, it would have been an important
promise. Right.
Yeah, there was some promise, and I mean the plan itself is important. Indonesia desperately needs refineries, and this refinery is integrated with petrochemicals, and it would have been able to produce Euro 5 standard fuels, which Indonesia is not yet capable of producing itself right now. So I think there's a chance that Indonesia can bring in a different investor for it, maybe Lotte from South Korea or something. I don't know, but this will be a casualty, though. Yes.
Oh, another possibility, another possible impact is arms purchases. Prabowo is shopping to improve the Indonesian military. It would take Russian arms off the table and probably push up the buying prices. Make it easier for the Chinese and the U.S.
It turns out, well, the U.S. is really controlling the international arms markets nowadays. There's the Countering Adversaries Act from 2017 in the U.S., which promises sanctions on anybody who purchases arms from Russia or North Korea or Iran. And that has already deterred Indonesia from ordering more Sukhoi fighter jets. So Prabowo decided last month to instead purchase French Rafale jets and maybe US F-15. So that's one of those things that was already off the table, I think.
All right. Well, we'll cut that bit. No, leave it in. I look stupid, but that's fine. It happens. All right, moving on. PLN is actually seriously maybe thinking about mothballing coal-fired power plants.
Yeah, they're talking the talk anyway, which is not nearly as good as walking the talk, but at least it's better than complete silence, which had been the case for many years. So there's a sort of an initiative by three big state enterprises, Pertamina, PLN, and the fertilizer firm Pupuk, to sign an MOU pledging to pursue renewable energy and green industry. It's all very vague, but nonetheless, it does mark a step forward, even if it is just rhetoric. Pupuk, in particular, is planning to go into either green hydrogen or green ammonia, or both. These are technologies that basically can serve as a store of energy. So you use the renewable power to produce either hydrogen or ammonia, which you can then relatively easily transport and then burn as a fuel. So this is an idea for basically transferring power to remote areas of the country. There's talk by the new PLN chief director, Darmawan Prasojo, about pursuing a project to produce 1 gigawatt of electricity from renewable power with continuous supply, i.e. with batteries integrated to ensure that the electricity comes out continuously 24/7. And you mentioned an investment value of $3 to $4 billion US, without providing any more details. It's still very early stages, but so these are steps forward. These are things that these types of companies hadn't been talking about in the past, so it's encouraging.
There's another number there, $38 billion to possibly mothball, shut down all the coal-fired power plants. Interesting, $38 billion. I think I saw that. It's a similar number to how much it would cost to build the new capital.
Yeah, or the fast train to Bandung.
Increasingly, yeah.
Sounds like a bargain.
But they even say, that they are considering mothballing the coal-fired power plants. That's, rhetorically speaking, that's fairly huge, at least.
Right. Yeah. So that was from a different PLN official, sorry, actually, that was an energy ministry official in a separate event. It was a webinar about 10 days ago, and I think the context of that remark is a little bit unclear. I kind of wonder if maybe he was trying to convey the point that mothballing coal-fired power plants would be way too expensive. It would cost $38 billion, which is so therefore it can't ever be done. And I'm not really sure what his angle was in that one. So, and also the number itself is a bit questionable. It involves a lot of assumptions about the cost of the replacement energy used to supplant the power from the coal-fired power plants, which I think the number is a bit of an overestimate. There's definitely some countervailing trends happening right now.
I think it's also we weren't going to talk about this. I'm just going to spring it on you anyway. But our friend Ridwan Kamil is the governor of West Java. I don't know why I said friend. Isn't going to take the job. He's going to stay on as governor. He's going to the new capital commission. He's not going to head it up.
Yeah,
I think
yes, it's a little bit of a curveball because President Widodo made clear that he preferred Kamil for the role, which is a very powerful role. It's the key role. It's the person who will be in charge of planning the capital, implementing the move, and then managing the new capital. So it's a big job. And Kamil, of course, would have been good for it because he's an accomplished international architect, also has been a successful head of the country's biggest province for 4 years. But Kamil initially said that he was interested in it, but then changed his mind and made clear last week that he will not be taking the job if it's offered to him, and instead will remain as governor of West Java. And I suspect that reflects a political calculation on his part. It's good to be governor of West Java. It gives him opportunities in future. He can get reelected as governor, if nothing else, in November 2024. So it's a blow to the capital move project, though, because the project needed a boost, and it needed the credibility and the credentials, cachet of somebody like Kamil. So now they're talking about Bambang Susantono. That's the figure who's receiving mention in reports as the potential appointee, and he's a former vice transportation minister. So he's somebody who's clean and credible and has the right professional qualifications. He's a PhD in urban planning. However, he does not have political stature. He's not known by the public. He's never been a minister or a regional head. So he would not provide the boost that the project needs at this stage to get off the ground, unfortunately.
Yeah, not a household name. And I thought it was kind of interesting that it was a former vice minister in a previous administration.
Yeah,
I had never heard of. Versus Ridwan Kamil, who most people have. But why go with an unknown when you had a big star who said no? It kind of feels like there's a lack of confidence in the project.
Right, exactly. Yeah, on the part of Kamil, at least. Yeah, I mean, I think if Kamil really regarded this capital move as being a real thing with real money and real prospects, then he would have gone for it, because it's actually a dream job for him. I mean, it's doing precisely what he loves to do, which is building cities. So the fact that he said, no, thanks, I'll stay where I am, indicates that he, at least, is intelligent, well-positioned person sees the capital move project as being a little bit far-fetched. It does not have budget funds behind it right now, and it's really being promoted solely by Widodo, who only has another 2.5 years in office. So it's a vote of weak confidence for sure.
The among the likely contenders for president, what's the feeling like for the new capital? Has Prabowo come out for it? Has Ganjar?
Not really, no. In fact, only Kamil was the only person who showed some enthusiasm for it. Originally, when Widodo first broached the idea of moving the capital from Jakarta to Kalimantan, Kamil came out with the idea of moving the capital of West Java from Bandung to a location to the west a bit. So he's the only one who's been enthusiastic about it. By the same token, neither Prabowo nor Ganjar have ruled out the idea of continuing with the project. So, it's very much a gray area.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Coming up after the break, the Economist Intelligence Unit, Yu Liuqing, to talk about the Democracy Index.
Hello, everybody. We are here, the Reformasi Dispatch podcast with Liuqing Yu of the Economist Intelligence Unit in Singapore. Liuqing is the country analyst who covers parts of Asia, including Indonesia. And we wanted to talk to you, Liuqing. Thanks for coming to joining us today. Thanks for being here to talk about the Democracy Index that the EIU has recently published, which you contributed to, I think, right?
Yeah, thank you very much, Kevin, for having me here. Loyal reader to Reformasi too, and yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, I scored Indonesia's Democracy Index.
Okay, so I guess before we get to Indonesia's score for 2021, tell us a bit about the Democracy Index. How long has it been around, and what's the main goal there?
Has been around for a pretty long time. And the main goal is basically to assess, let's say, the democracy situation around the world and see like the general trend of development, whether democracy is gaining ground or is it losing tractions. And every year we will find the main theme to look at, like that, let's say, how it drives democracy development across the world.
Mm-hmm. And it covers every country in the world?
Basically, I would say.
Yeah. What countries do you look at?
I look after Singapore, Indonesia, and India in part as well.
Okay. So I was noticing with the Democracy Index that each country gets a range of, or it gets graded on a score of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, on 6 different categories. Is that right?
So we have 5 categories to look at, basically. There will be electoral process and pluralism, and civil liberty, whether that is, let's say, respected or protected, and the functioning of government, is it in the democratic way, or is it more in a authoritarian kind of way? And also we have political participation of people and political culture in the country.
And civil liberties comes into that 5th category?
Yeah, civil liberty is one of the standalone, yeah.
All right. Yeah, can you walk us through the methodology? So when you're looking at those 5 different categories, you're looking at just events during the course of the calendar year, and then judging, is it relative to other countries or relative to the past year, or how do you kind of go through that and formulate and come out with a number at the end?
Now, I suppose if I could just jump in there, that we should just point out to the listener that Indonesia was one of the few countries that actually posted a gain. It's actually more democratic than last year. That's so yeah. I mean, how did you come to that? Sorry, I just wanted to jump in there to make that clear.
Sure. I mean, so the score is most of them are absolute, right? So most of them are a simple yes or no question, responding to a question relating to the 5 categories that we discussed earlier. In some occasions, there might be minor benchmarking between countries to ensure the consistency of the flow. And we have a mix of, let's say, subjective and objective questions. And for some of them, like there is a clear gray area in between. We have, let's say, so yes for 1, no for 0. We have a 0.5 in between for some of them. Again, a mix of subjective and objective answers. For the objective ones, we do not have to intervene that much. We just see the latest matrix, latest data. And also we have some backings from other surveys on the ground. Most important one being the World Value Survey. Yeah, so the subjective ones are predominantly affected by the assessment period of November the year before and November that year. But again, like there are events happening, there might be improvement, but that improvement, if that does not justify an upgrade, we will not upgrade the score.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. So like if in Myanmar the military stopped shooting people, that would be an improvement. That doesn't mean it's now a democracy.
That will definitely be a downgrade. So,
well, stop shooting people.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, Myanmar and Afghanistan are like the 2 countries that actually drag Asia down in democracy index last year.
And we're worse than North Korea.
Yeah, I mean, North Korea is consistently bad, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the benchmark, right?
Yeah. Why don't you tell us some of the scores there, if you know them off the top of your head, to put you on the spot? I think I saw that North Korea's overall score is below 2.
Right. North Korea, of course, like consistently, there's nothing to shout about in all those questions, basically. But for Indonesia, so we see pretty high results for many of the, like the 4 of the, let's say, 5 categories. But the one that is dragging behind is actually political culture, I think.
Yeah.
So that predominantly is a survey-based kind of like score category. And it basically shows that people are not that into participating or like looking at politics, and their perceptions to, let's say, democracy or other mode of like competing ideologies are actually better, or let's say they find them acceptable. Not everyone find democracy is the only acceptable way.
Right. And for that score, you rely on surveys such as domestic Indonesian opinion polls?
There is a world value survey that predominantly affect this category of score. That is down to, I think, 100 countries in the world, and every several years at least, it will be refreshed.
Liuqing, can I just jump in there? Sorry, I just want to jump. Well, can you put Indonesia's score in the context of its neighbors? I mean, it feels like a standout.
I think improvement near the neighbors are actually, let's say, India also get some sort of an upgrade. And looking at the neighbors, I think Indonesia falls behind India and probably Malaysia. And Indonesia's score is better than, let's say, Philippines and Singapore.
We will put you on the spot about Singapore, since you're actually coming to us from Singapore. But anyway.
So where does corruption fit in? Just good old-fashioned bribery and graft in Indonesia. Which category does that affect, if any?
Corruption definitely, I think, is a part of the assessment. I'm thinking which part is it? I think it is probably the functioning of the government.
Right.
And Indonesia does score pretty poorly in that area because corruption is an endemic, right?
Right. Yeah. I was noticing that Indonesia scored in the high sevens in the first two categories, so it did pretty well in terms of electoral processes. And category two is that participation?
Is it participation? I'm not sure if it is participation, but I think functioning of the government, yes, indeed. But corruption is like one part of like the um, functioning of government too. Like in the functioning of government, we look at various, let's say, factors as well, like whether legislature is the predominant supreme body, whether the government, let's say, whether there are checks and balances, whether the government is free from military influence. Free from foreign influence, free from interest groups. Does it have accountability? Does it exert full control to its full territory, right? So, corruption is one factor within it, but like that particular factor within functioning of government, yeah, it does score pretty badly. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, I just checked. So quite right. So category two is functioning of government. Category three is participation. So in that functioning of government, how about, for example, handling COVID and the omnibus, which sorted out the labor market regulatory issues that Indonesia has had? Are those kind of factors that might affect that category?
I think both of them does not really factor is not really factored into fed into functioning of government. Well, the omnibus bill law, omnibus one actually is interesting. By like the jurisdiction actually trying to, let's say, rule it as unconstitutional temporarily for fix, that actually reflect a sense of check and balances.
Yeah.
So and also like the independence of judiciary, right? So that
Hmm.
actually trigger us to give it a little upgrade on that score. It does not mean that we do not value what omnibus law on job creation do. It is just that the ruling of it, this ruling actually show that there are checks and balances, and it reflects good on the let's say democratic institutions in Indonesia. Regarding COVID, this does not really fit into the functioning of government, really, but it might fit into, not sure whether political participation or rather civil liberty, because when government initiate, let's say, let's say, lockdowns, that usually is viewed as constraining people's choice. I know this sounds, let's say, a little strange, but this is how the index is designed, right? So that will keep that score low for a little bit.
There's
Oh,
truckers
interesting.
in
So
Canada that would agree with you.
they would agree, right? If I'm understanding. So cracking down or locking down the public for purposes of public health negatively affects the civil liberties score of a country's rating.
Right. I mean, the argument is that this index like gives a very heavy focus on, let's say, democracy institutions themselves. It does not really factor in that much of, let's say, economic development, well-being. And we sort of like solely look at democracy institutions and
Okay.
let's say civil liberties, right? So that does curtail that a little bit, but there are bigger picture things that we should, like if we take it out of the context of democracy, there are certain things that we should paying attention as well, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's what I was wondering about. Thanks.
Can I jump in there, Kevin? I'm putting you on the spot right now. Do you agree with the finding?
Me, well, first of all, I wanted to kind of review the findings here. So just for clarity for everybody. So On the 5 categories, electoral processes and pluralism, Indonesia scored 7.9, which is pretty good. Similar on functioning of government. On political participation, 7.2, which I think is pretty good. The 4th category, political culture, only 4.4. Civil liberties, 6.2, for a total score of 6.7, which was a substantial increase from the year before. So anyway, that's where we stand. And I think that there is reason to upgrade Indonesia during 2021. But it's a tough question. It's an interesting one because there's a mix of factors, I think. Widodo postponed regional head elections that are due to take place over the next couple of years. And there's been some heavy-handed legal maneuvering by people in the Widodo administration, such as Muldoko and Luhut Panjaitan, who have threatened defamation suits against NGOs. But as Liuqing mentioned, the Constitutional Court ruled professionally on the omnibus, which I think the Widodo administration is relieved about that. They probably regard that ruling as a win for them, but I concur that in any event, it shows that the Constitutional Court is handling its affairs professionally, which is important. So I think Indonesia was a tough one to score in 2021.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Sorry.
No, but what if we backtrack, doing this? Like, is it better off? Like the Ronald Reagan question to Jimmy Carter in 1980: Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Is Indonesia better off now democratically than when Jokowi came to power in 2014? And I think the answer is no.
I can backtrack the answers, data a little bit, but I think the peak of the score is actually something somewhere at 2015, 2016, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then it sort of goes downhill from there with the Ahok demonstrations, probably a catalyst for the decline.
Right, probably for that, and in
And
2020,
KPK.
of course, yeah.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is just simply defining democratically. So to ask, is Indonesia better off democratically than it was 4 years ago? It's got that functioning of government category, and in that respect, if you look at democracy as something which is meant to deliver better results for people, and therefore the functioning of government matters in the score, then Indonesia deserves an upgrade, I think, because the Widodo administration has handled COVID quite well. I think what's interesting is to try to define the term democratically, because to ask if Indonesia is better off democratically than it was 4 years ago depends on how broadly democratically is defined. If it does include the functioning of government in the sense that democracy is designed to deliver better results for its citizens, then Widodo's administration has been functioning pretty well, actually, because it's handled COVID much better than a lot of countries. It solved this labor market regulatory problem, which has been an Achilles heel for Indonesia for 2 decades. And also
infrastructure spending.
Social spending has actually kept poverty in check. And sectarianism is down relative to 2018, especially. So, but if it's a more narrow definition of democratically, then I think there's been some setbacks and or missed opportunities, if nothing else, at the very least, in terms of furthering Indonesia's democratization. Widodo has really been intent on creating cohesion and consensus and control and pressuring the opposition, frankly.
Liuqing, are you taking notes? No.
Yeah, for what it's worth, not much.
Are you getting this down? Sorry, go ahead, mate.
I kind of want to say that the functioning of government in this regard, in our regard, is not really measuring, let's say, the performance as such, right? Like, not really factor in economic development, as we say. but like it merely reflects how the functioning of government, let's say, is aligned to the, let's say, consensual or let's say widely regarded kind of like democracy value. But something I find pretty interesting is that I know that there are some backsliding in terms of like during Jacob's tenure in some cases, and that is partly reflected in the score as well. But we mentioned earlier that, let's say, the political culture is where it is scored pretty badly before. But actually, when I contrast my scoring between 2021 and 2020, a good part of them actually comes from the improvement in political culture. So it was worse
Oh,
before.
that's interesting. And that has to do with the general public accepting and embracing democracy, basically.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think of what questions actually trigger those upgrades. So in World Value Survey, I think the respect for human right score,
Mm.
I think that actually get bumped up. Like there are wider, let's say, percentage of people view it as critically important, I think. And
Hmm.
also the perception to democracy, I think it actually improved a little bit in the World Value Survey, and that also triggered an upgrade. If
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, I think that is the case. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the World Value Survey, actually. I do notice that there's been numerous domestic Indonesian opinion polls, which, as you know, are quite good. And they've consistently showed that there's a large majority which favors democracy versus alternative forms of government. And I was kind of working under the assumption that Indonesia is strong in that respect relative to a lot of countries in the world. I was assuming stronger than the U.S. I guess the U.S. is a bad example. Probably shouldn't bring the U.S. into this. But what do you think about that? Are is it unusual for a majority of the public of a country to endorse and embrace democracy?
I think it is not unusual in a sense, particularly as it seems that, as you say, like the economic and the functioning of government actually partly improved, right? And so that kind of endorsed that democracy is doing okay in Indonesia. And that's what we see in the World Value Survey as well. Like the rate, the, let's say, approval is going up. But I do want to mention that Indonesians' perception to military rule and to, I think, let's say, experts, technocrats ruling the country, it is still pretty high. I mean, it kind of gives us a pretty low rating in there, as far as I remember. But
Okay.
so like they also view them as, I would not say acceptable, but probably more favorable than what our metrics thinks is ideal.
That's probably just the utter dearth of alternatives. It's probably just the dearth of alternatives they have.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Liuqing. I don't know if this might be outside of your purview. Indonesian democracy is a child of the '90s, really. When China and Russia didn't really have the sway that it does now. Do you think that the same thing could be repeated? Do you think if it were if the fall of Suharto were to have happened in 2018, would we be talking 30 years, 20 years from now about the transition to democracy? It's a question for both of you, actually. Was it a one-off? We're just lucky?
Well, if we look at the trend, and I think that period actually also coincides with, let's say, democracy gaining ground across the world. Um, yeah, I think that timing is also very important. But let's say if this happens now, where we still view democracy, although somehow gaining a little traction in Asia, in some countries, it really might be just harder, I would say.
Yeah, I guess it came out of the Asian financial crisis. There really wasn't much of an alternative. I mean, it was a bit of a mess. But it just occurred to me that wow, this happened in the '90s when there was a march of democracy, and I'm just wondering if it could happen now. Kevin, stupid question.
Yeah. No, I wrote a book about this topic, so that's not a stupid question.
That's what's propping up my computer. I've got my computer on it to visit out. Yeah.
At the time, I thought it was fortunate for Indonesia and that the story was remarkable, but I didn't realize then that it was actually really extraordinary, because in retrospect, in hindsight, since then, so many other countries have failed where Indonesia succeeded in democratization, all throughout the Middle East in particular. But even in Southeast Asia, there have not been many great strides towards democracy, and some countries are falling backwards, especially Myanmar. And it was a remarkable sort of series of circumstances in Indonesia. The Suharto regime conducted elections every 5 years. They were shams, but they went through the process, and that created a bit of an institution and a ritual of people going to the polls. But then it was the voters themselves who were well enough educated and plugged into their communities and their society to embrace democracy really wholeheartedly in 1999 and then in subsequent elections. And it's really been proven to be the case that they participate and they vote their minds and they use their consciences, and they generally make pretty sound choices overall. And if there's a reformer who is a genuine article who cares about their constituents, those figures typically win. So it was lucky that Indonesia was able to get through that, though, without having the military intervene again. And part of that is because it's a big country with a small military, so it wasn't as feasible as it is in a lot of other smaller states where a coup d'etat is a bit more practically feasible in terms of logistics. Liuqing, I wanted to ask you now, for next year's democracy index, what are you going to be looking at in Indonesia for its next rating?
Well, that really kind of depends on the event flow this year. But I think some, let's say, general improvement that we might be looking at is the civil liberty bit. Of course, we will see pandemic-related restrictions being loosened. So I see that as a potential upgrade. And other things to watch out for me, probably will be the opposition, whether they can exert a check and balance. And whether the assault to, let's say, opposition, or rather, let's say, the weakening of opposition will continue to take place, right? And also, I think the consistent, continuous struggle between the secular, more, let's say, secular kind of force and the more, let's say, religious-oriented kind of force within or beyond the parliament, I think it's still something to watch, and definitely that might affect our, let's say, political culture or let's say civil liberty kind of like ratings.
But you feel confident that the democracy and the democratic institutions and the feeling of entitlement to vote is sort of been Indianized. It's sort of like it's embedded in the culture, and we're not just one bad election away from backsliding. Like if we get a Prabowo presidency, sorry, I sort of came out against the Prabowo, but if we get if we get the wrong guy in there, can we backslide to the era of Suharto?
I think backsliding, like all the way back to that, is pretty hard. But let's say there is risks of like encroachment of like let's say democratic rights. I like there is clear risk of that. But like I think, let's say, the voting and democracy, democratic institutions are much more more entrenched than, let's say, some of the regional peers probably.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you, Liuqing, from the Economist Intelligence Unit. We appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Liuqing. Great.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, you got an interesting job anyway.
And that's the pod. Thanks so much to Yu Liuqing of the Economist Intelligence Unit. Our editing and sound engineering is done by Stephen Handoko. Our music is courtesy of the Blue Dot Sessions. For a free trial of Kevin's Reformasi weekly newsletter, go to reformasi.info. If you're listening to us through a podcast app, please subscribe and rate us. It helps. As always, you can reach us at hello@onthelevel.id. This podcast is a production of On the Level Media. I'm Jeff Hutton. Bye for now.